keynote speech of today, we have Raj Kumar online. He is the president and editor-in-chief of Devex. I hope you all know Devex. It's based in Washington, and it's I would say it's a think tank. It's also a global development community, very renowned, very notable. They published many articles with high relevance for the world of development, are trend watchers, also watchdogs. And today we are very glad. Oh, thank you saw my back. I'm so sorry. Welcome. I didn't know you were there already. Welcome. And we are very curious to listen to your talk about the predictions for this year, which has already started and has taken off a little bit less positive than we anticipated or than we had hoped for, internationally, but also nationally in our case. And in your case, I think as well. And well, we would also love to hear some of your observations or some of your analysis on the situation in the US. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'll hand over to you, and I'll get back to you with Q&As after. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liana, and it's so nice to be with all of you. I wish I could be there in person. You hear me well, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I wish I was there in person, but things in Washington, D.C. are much more interesting at the moment. This is certainly the place to be if you are doing my work, which is journalism and trying to cover the news. There is a lot of news here in Washington every day, every hour, it seems like something very new is happening. And we at Devex are doing our very best to try to cover that for all of you. Are you hearing me okay? Just want to make sure before I keep going.
Yeah, we're trying to get it louder. Yeah, it's okay.
I'll give you a moment just to make sure it's audible for everyone.
Geef me even.
Yeah, is this better?
Okay,
I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can all hear me all right? Yeah? Okay. Well, again, it's a real pleasure to get to be with all of you. Even if I wish I had better news to share, it is a very challenging moment. One of the things I have been doing for many years now is kind of trying to predict, as much as that's a very dangerous thing, trying to predict what's going to come in our sector, in development and humanitarian response, and looking at it as kind of an industry and thinking about what changes may come. And I would say over my career of doing this, and we started Devex now 25 years ago, I've mostly made one mistake, which is I have predicted things will happen sooner than they actually happen. This year, I've made the opposite mistake. Everything is happening at once. And so to start the year in January, I wrote my annual predictions article, and I predicted 5 things. And I'll just take you through what I think those things are. And I think the fact is many of them, not all, but many of them have moved much faster than I expected. So one is I predicted peak official development assistance. So we have seen the highest watermark of official development assistance. Now, I think a key caveat, asterisk for that, is from the global north. Okay, from countries like the Netherlands and the US. There is much more aid coming from the Gulf states, coming from India, coming from Turkey. China right now is not growing its aid budget, but there is much more potential aid out there. So there may be a higher total amount of ODA in the future. But from our traditional OECD donors, we have witnessed peak ODA. I also said that our bilateral aid agencies, like USAID in the US or FCDO in the UK, they will increasingly turn into humanitarian aid agencies. They have development in their name, but they will be humanitarian agencies instead. And the rationale there is that the humanitarian needs are growing so quickly, much more quickly than funding. Humanitarian needs are urgent. They typically are emergencies, whether they're natural disasters or conflicts. And global north countries feel a need to immediately respond using the budget that they have, even as their overall budget is shrinking. So the percentage of their official development assistance going to humanitarian aid has been growing over the years. And my prediction is that it will become most of what these agencies end up doing. Long-term development will shrink and shrink and shrink. I also said that I think the multilateral development banks and the development finance institutions will take more of a lead when it comes to long-term development. And I think we've been seeing that now for many years of the DFIs, national DFIs, like in the Netherlands, like in the US and elsewhere, growing their budget, growing their political importance. And I expect that will continue. And the MDB system, because there's already a lot of paid-in capital, because the shareholding countries have set up the system already, it has a lot of potential to keep growing, mostly through financial engineering, not through new money from the global north, but they're doing that. And I expect the MDBs to be more and more important. I also predicted that the United Nations agencies will lose in this new realignment. That's partly because many of them are heavily dependent on the United States. Several of them get more than 40% of their annual funding from the US. It's also partly because when money is tight, when governments are pulling back, they want to spend money in ways they can better direct, where they have more control, where they can say this is America first, or the Netherlands first, or the UK first. That's how they're thinking. And the UN doesn't really let them do that in the same way. Some UN agencies do take bilateral money and do directed projects, like International Organization of Migration is an example. But for the most part, it's not the best vehicle for politicians in the global north to spend scarce resources and get exactly the outcome they're looking for. And so the UN, I predicted, will lose to the multilateral development banks and the DFIs. My last prediction for this year was that philanthropy will become a much more important player and will have a new strategy. The first four predictions I told you, those have largely played out in just a couple of months, largely because of what happened in the US, but also what's happened in the UK, and of course the situation in the Netherlands too. So those have happened. Philanthropy has not yet moved. It is largely watching and waiting, and it's very cautious at the moment, but we can talk a little bit more about what might happen there. My overall prediction is that many of the challenges we're seeing in our politics are related directly to inequality, to wealth inequality, that has spurred more and more populism. And that wealth inequality is quite extreme. You know, we now have billionaires controlling 10 trillion US dollars. There are 17 individuals alone who are worth more than $100 billion. So when you think about the Gates Foundation and how important it's been, this year the Gates Foundation will spend about 9 billion US dollars. That makes it one of the top few largest bilateral aid donors in the world, bigger than almost all global north governments. Bill Gates can do that because of his level of wealth and Warren Buffett's wealth, but there are 16 other people who can do it too. Now, they haven't done it. You see Michael Bloomberg is maybe one example. He's now spending 3 billion US a year. That's about the size of the Danish government, to give you an idea. So I expect you will see more of these billionaire philanthropists grow their overall spending. It may not all happen this year. It may not happen right away, but I expect you'll see more of it. And I think they'll become a much bigger player. We can talk more about the implications of that, the positive and the negative implications of philanthropy being a bigger player. But overall, I think that the speed with which the political disruption has happened in the US caught most everyone by surprise. We expected cuts. At Devex, we host a big annual conference called Devex World, and we held it just a couple of weeks before the US election. And we invited both Democrats and Republicans to the event. In fact, we had two of the authors of Project 2025, which is this now famous report that was written to guide the Trump administration's policy. So they came and they were on our stage, and we asked them about their philosophy and their approach. Even they have been shocked by what's happened in the US government. It's gone way beyond them. We have seen cuts in the US that go past our political norms and maybe even past our legal norms. And judges have had to weigh in as to whether or not some of these actions are even basically legal. But nonetheless, they've happened, and we've seen US aid completely stop, ground to an immediate halt, with huge implications for organizations like yours in the room, and for especially the people that are meant to be served by these programs. Some of them have come back, but very few. maybe 15 to 20%. There's a sense that we may end up at 25% of the original budget. So this is a massive cut, maybe $30 billion in total loss to global foreign assistance. And much of that will come out of the UN system, which is going to be particularly hit, but also lots of international NGOs. So I feel as though I looked at my predictions that I made at the beginning of the year. I think 4 of them have come true much more quickly than I expected them to. I thought these would be issues that play out over time, and instead the US moving so quickly pushed these to move much faster, and the politics shifted as a result. And I was at the Munich Security Conference just a couple of months ago, where European leaders essentially realized that the US is no longer the kind of trustworthy transatlantic ally that they could have counted on, and have decided they really need to increase defense spending. They were planning to do it, but they're now doing it at a much faster rate than expected. And so you see the resulting cuts in UK aid. And I think you're seeing similar pressures across continental Europe. And so all of this is moving a little bit faster than people really thought it would. And so you're seeing a lot more pressure. And what does that mean for all of you? What does it mean for people who work in this space? I think everyone who works in global development in the traditional NGO space and the humanitarian space, we all felt the system wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't designed in the most effective way. But reforms were slow and they were hard. Now we have no time. We have no choice. We have to disrupt ourselves or we will be disrupted. And so what does that mean? That means things like thinking about and moving toward mergers and acquisitions, even in the nonprofit space, at a much faster rate with much more aggressive risk taking than we would have done in the past. It means rethinking our business model to design it not for the most reliable, highly paying government donors, but for much more challenging private, individual, philanthropic donors. And so we need to think about lowering our overheads dramatically, moving our work more and more to the global south, including our operational centers. Much of this has happened. It's been happening for years, but I think the rate of change has to accelerate dramatically if we hope to keep our impact up. I think we need to move much more toward a results-based approach when it comes to development and humanitarian programming, which naturally will lead to more localized work. Right? It will lead to funding more local organizations, investing in local organizations to grow their own capabilities. Again, nothing new, but the rate of this change, I think, is going to be forced upon us to be very quick. Overall, I think we're moving from an aid model to more of an investment model. Because even if long-term development assistance starts coming from philanthropies, these philanthropists will not have the same kind of grant and contract-based approach that governments have had. They will have a much more investment-minded approach. They will be trying to fund outcomes. And we need to have our own model shift to capture that kind of funding. And the truth is that technology has changed the opportunity to do that kind of work. We can now much better track and target funding. We can much better see what funding has created what result. We can even get money directly in the hands of someone who needs it through what I call retail aid, instead of the old model, which is more wholesale aid, sitting in global capitals around the world and going through many layers of subcontractors. We can now get directly to people, even individuals. And we know that we've been doing it. We need to do it at a much faster rate, I would argue. I think we also need to reinvent the way we talk to the public. Part of the reason we have so quickly seen foreign assistance drop in the developed world is I think we never made a very strong case to our voters. And that's particularly visible in the US, where we thought we had one of the strongest alliances. We had faith leaders, military leaders, business leaders, all backing foreign aid. But it was very much an elite conversation. And once the president and Elon Musk went to the American people and said, this is a criminal organization, this money is all wasted, people believed it. We hadn't built deep roots of public support. And so I think we need to think about how we're engaging our own publics, our own voters in a much deeper way, including as donors, including as individual donors, asking them to give. But involving them in more of an investment-minded approach where they can see the tangible results of what they do, what they give, not just feel good that they see a photograph of children who have been helped, but actually see the data, see the numbers, feel much more connected to the programmatic work. We can do that today with technology. I think we're forced to do it now. So all of this is to say, and I'll wrap up now because I want to hear your questions and hopefully we can have a little discussion, even though it's challenging over video. All of this is to say, we all knew change was coming. Our sector typically changes slower than others. Frankly, other industries have been disrupted much more quickly by globalization, by new technologies, by new capital. Ours has been more slowly affected in many ways because government has been such a big part of our funding model. But that can change, as we've learned, very fast. And the Netherlands changing in just a year or two, very dramatically. And the same in many other parts of Europe, and now in the US even more dramatically. So we know this now, and the sooner we come to terms with it, and the sooner we capture this moment to reinvent ourselves, the more we will be able to advance our own missions ultimately and help more people, even in a situation where we're facing real stress to our models. So let me pause there and open it up, and I'd love to hear from more of you.
Thank you very Thank you very much, Raj. Let's give him a hand of applause for it. Get back with the view. I was there at the Senate. Are there any questions from the audience? And while you are thinking of a question, I'll start. I'm here, so I can be. I can just do this because what you indicate is that we have to reinvent this business model very quickly, and we have to act very quickly as well. But also that the sector has been slow in moving. So it's like a juxtaposition. On the one hand, we are very slow. On the other hand, we have to be very fast. Now, how do you marry those two ideas? Do you have any suggestions or do you have any ideas about that? Because at the end of the day, what we want is to create impact, to have an impact. And that's our business model, to have impact.
In many ways, Liana, I think of this as a cultural change, right? Many organizations, let's think about mergers as one example. Nonprofits can merge, many have merged, but when you go back and look at the history of those mergers, usually it's a merger out of necessity. One organization is failing, it's weak, and another organization takes it on almost as a favor. They bring it in. Why don't organizations in our sector merge out of strength the way they do in the private sector? Well, it's often the case that board members don't want to lose their sense of autonomy. It's maybe the case that people are attached to the brand and they say, we built this brand over many years, maybe decades. We don't want to lose that brand. Or they're attached to their jobs and their roles in the organization. And they know the merger is only valuable if you can really reinvent the structure. These are all natural things, but they've kept our sector from some of the natural change that helps us advance. So it's a cultural problem in a lot of ways, and government funding made it worse because government is very risk averse. And so we, in many ways, took on some of the risk aversion of government. And we said, well, we have to be very cautious. First, be very cautious with the way we work, because if we make a mistake, then someone's going to bring us before the parliament and talk about that mistake. So I think that cultural shift is probably the first thing we need to accept, because the culture has shifted in government. It has changed there very dramatically. And so we need to change our own culture. And I would submit every nonprofit today, their board needs to have a written mergers and acquisitions strategy. It could be 1 or 2 pages, but they need to say, these are the conditions under which we would give up our organization to another organization. And these are the conditions in which we would accept another one and merge into them. And we need to take it that seriously. And I think often we haven't taken it in that way, that seriously. So it's a cultural shift more than anything else.
Thanks. A cultural shift is also a very slow shift. So again, but I get your point, and I think you're correct. We had a session a couple of weeks ago where someone also explained the role of the boards when it comes to reinventing your business model, and it's crucial. So that you emphasize this is only maybe something that we can add to our long to-do list, have a discussion with the board. Are there any questions from the audience at this stage? Because I have many more. Kwasi, yeah? Then I'll wait.
Thanks.
Maybe introduce yourself also.
Yes, can you see me?
I can see you fine. Hi.
Yeah, hey. My name is Kwasi Buahene from Pharmaxis. Thanks for the presentation. 2 points. So, certainly the aid freeze is a wake-up call, but there's also a voice in Africa, and particularly the president of Kenya some time ago made a video where he's saying that Africans should not complain about the aid freeze in the US, but they do not pay income tax to the American government. And so you also have that negative voices coming up out of Africa. And some of them are also saying that aid has never helped any African country to develop. And then the examples, they point to countries like South Korea and Malaysia, which 65 years ago were richer than Ghana, but are today giving aid to Ghana. And so then there's that deeper feeling that it has to be different. And I agree that there should be an investment model. But I think it's also easy to talk about investment model when given some of the issues that we are dealing with. And so I don't know how you can do investment model for insurance, have insurance, investment in hospitals and etc. But if you look at some of the issues that we are dealing with, homo emancipation, I wonder how you can build a business model around that, human rights, democracy, and etc. So just to expand a bit on your idea of investment model and some of these sensitive issues.
Yeah, great question. I would say a couple things. So first, it's natural that the narrative coming out of many African leaders is to say, you know what, we don't need this aid. In some ways, this is good. We need to, take our own sovereignty back and make our own decisions. I understand where that sentiment comes from. I think many of the leaders I talk to really feel that way, but the nature of the cuts, the rapid nature of the cuts, the disruptive nature of the cuts has made this a very negative situation, even in Kenya. Something like 65,000 Kenyan healthcare workers didn't show up to work at the hospital because they were paid directly by USAID and the funding was frozen. So think about the millions of Kenyan citizens who show up to the hospital and there's no healthcare workers, right? It's one thing if the US government had done a little closer to what the Netherlands or the UK had done and said, we are going to cut over the next 2 years, 3 years. This is what it will look like. Governments could plan around that. But many African governments were suddenly faced with large percentage of their population dependent on antiretroviral drugs for HIV, and the drugs are not there. The government might have spent the money and figured it out and solved it if they were given even weeks of notice, but they got no notice. So I think I understand the sentiment coming out of African leaders because they are not happy with the way the aid system works at all. They don't want to go back to the old system. Most of the ones I speak to say, we want to have much more control over how we spend this funding. And I talked to one health minister who says, half of the health provision in my country is done through NGOs. I don't know anything about it. I have no control over it. And I want to have one health system. So I understand the sentiment. And I think if we move to an investment model, we would be thinking about things like investing in healthcare infrastructure, including pharmaceutical manufacturing in countries, including tertiary hospitals. And that model, which can be privately funded in part, if it's de-risked by the development finance institutions and the World Bank and others, that model could lead to more sustained long-term development instead of a more band-aid approach, solving a small problem here and there, which is how African leaders often see the aid system. It's doing important work, it's solving problems, it's helping save lives, but it's not doing it in a sustainable way. That's one of the critiques I often hear. Now, you're right. the investment model doesn't necessarily apply to everything. So democracy, human rights, women's rights, there, it's hard to think about an investment model. But I would add, an investment mindset, even if it's really just grants, can be a useful thing. Because instead of the global north coming in and doing a lot of its own work around democracy and human rights, we can think about investing in the local ecosystem in each country for these kinds of things, right? Investing in grassroots organizations, which is much more cost effective and much more likely to be sustainable. It's still aid, you're right. There's no returnable capital, there's no real financial investment. But that sustainability mindset, I think, is still helpful, even when you think about just localizing traditional aid work.
Thanks, very clear. There's a question in the back. While Ida is going there, I have a follow-up question because you also linked it, or you related, or you talked about philanthropy in the beginning. Is this also a way of attracting philanthropists to the work of NGOs, being very clear about the ultimate impact? And that's what you're talking about, the impact of the program or the activity that you're planning to undertake. Is this how philanthropists think? Maybe not so much in a monetary way, but more in an impact kind of way.
Yeah, I think philanthropists are each one is different. There are lots of individuals, they have their own ideas. That's one of the potential dangers of having just a small number of billionaires kind of controlling long-term development. Yeah. But that may be where we're going, right? So what do they in general think and feel? Well, many of them have made their own money. They've built a business. They come from a business mindset. They think they're brilliant. They made a fortune in their business. They think I can solve any problem. So give me the problem and I'll solve it. And that they don't want to just give money to a program that USAID used to fund and no longer funds. They want to solve some real problem in the world and feel like they can take credit for it personally. So they're going to be more directive, and they're going to care much more about the end result. And they're going to want to see the numbers around that result. So an example would be eliminating a human disease. We're very close to eliminating 5 or 6 human diseases. And you could argue if we do it, Bill Gates, let's say it's polio, that might be the thing he's remembered for 100 years from now, just as much as starting Microsoft, right? And I think a lot of billionaires will think in these terms. What's the thing I could have done? I did something in business. What's the thing I can do in philanthropy that I will be known for, that will really change things? And therefore, impact really matters. They don't want to just fund your NGO to do your good work. They want to know, how do I move the needle in the world? And if I have to fund 5 NGOs and take some risks here and there, I'll do that. I think because of that mindset, they have also mostly stayed on the sidelines because they think it's too hard. They think I have to hire McKinsey. I need to spend millions of dollars and study this. I need to understand it. They don't want to just write a check to organizations that are already doing good work. They really want to get deep. And that stops many of them from even engaging. So you have 200 billionaires who've signed the Giving Pledge. That's the pledge that says they'll give away half their wealth during their life or upon their death. But when you look at that list, very few have given much money away at all. Very few. So I think I understand why, but I think we may be entering an era where populism rises so much. In the US, it's people in the Republican Party now, in the Trump administration, calling for higher taxes. That's not something we've normally experienced, right? So I think many billionaires are thinking, I either will lose this money through populist taxes, or I will give it to a foundation, donate it, and I will have control over it. And I expect more and more of them will give significant amounts through their philanthropies. And that's an opportunity. It's also a lot of risk. There's a lot of downsides, but it's an opportunity too.
Thanks, very clear. So you have to wait in the back, and then
yes, I came from War Child, and I wanted to connect. You were saying that we need to also advocate and our voice to be heard. Like you mentioned also what Raj said, that this is not useful, so it's not useful. But I think it's not about the public not knowing the problems in the South. The problem is mostly what I see, what happened in the US and what happened in the Netherlands as well, is playing on people's fear about their own well-being. So social security, health. So it's not that I don't know that Africa has problems, but I have problems too. And the government that got in office, they played on this fear. This is how we got the leaders we have today, right? So they played on, yes, there's problems in the South, but we have problems as well. So let's solve our problems. We have social security problems, we have education problems. So I don't know how much it's the narrative. And I'm not really sure because everybody in this room has been advocating, has been on TV, has been on social media. We're in the middle of war, right? In Gaza. So they know that there are problems around the world. And it's a very, very strong narrative that is used against this. It's but you matter. It's about you. The money of the Dutch for the Dutch, the money of Americans for America. No more presence from the people of the US. So how do we counter this very strong narrative?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is a very difficult problem. I don't mean to make it sound easy, but for example, yesterday I interviewed a Republican congressman. He's a powerful congressman who is, very much a supporter of Donald Trump and in that wing of the party, but he is a supporter of humanitarian aid and development aid. He believes in it. And so somehow we've converted him because he's more knowledgeable. He's gotten to travel around the world. He's gotten to see the work, and he understands a bit more about how it connects to America's national security. He comes from a religious background, so he believes in it from a religious perspective. And I think that you're right, the fear argument and the real headwinds, let's be honest, there's truth in what the right-wing parties say, right? That there's huge fiscal deficits in most of the global north. There are big pension and healthcare obligations. The demographics are not good when it comes to funding those pension and healthcare obligations. There's new defense costs. A lot of what they say is true. It's based on some truth. But we have not made a case to our public that a very small amount of the budget, a very small amount, actually will help fund our Social Security and our defense and our long-term health care. Because if we don't do it, we will end up in much more dire situations around the world that will necessitate more spending on defense and cutting some of those benefits in other areas, right? We haven't connected all of it. And I don't want to say that's an easy argument. I know it's really hard, but we have to engage it and we have to try. And I think too often our development and humanitarian community has become an elite conversation. We talk to each other. We don't engage with the people who don't agree with us. We don't bring the skeptics into the room. We just shout them down and say, they don't know, right? That's a big mistake because now they represent more and more of the public that votes in our countries. And we need to directly engage. And I can say that's something we try to do at Devex, speaking with people who really don't believe in this work or who are real critics of it. I've had to sit on stage and interview Republicans who have very critical views, who don't believe in climate change. But I think it's really important to engage them and talk with them as equals, as peers, and really listen to them respectfully. And I think we've missed some of that as advocates.
Thanks. We have some organizations in the room that have started doing exactly this. So it's good to know that this is a recommendation from your side. But we also recognize that it is that we call it bubble. We've been in our own bubble. And everyone has been in their own bubble, and it's time to break those, let's say, silos and start having real conversations. I saw that Garant had a question and Pepijn. And then I think we're out of time, but if you have an urgent question, maybe we could break a couple of minutes. Garant.
Thanks for your very inspiring words. I'm Garant, I'm from Plan International. I wanted to pick up on what you said at the beginning of your lecture around that bilateral governments will be increasingly moving towards humanitarian. And I see that happening. It's happening in our own portfolio in many countries. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts around how within that given, I'm afraid it's a given, we could keep the long-term perspective, the nexus thinking, but that's our own internal jargon. How do we keep some long-term perspective alive within that humanitarian funding? Because even our own government with a minister who now says, okay, I'll do food, water, and a bit of health. That's it. And how do we manage to, within that humanitarian portfolio, keep some of the long-term perspectives alive? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I expect we may well see some of the UN humanitarian agencies be forced to close or to merge. And I think if we see that, if we see the traditional way humanitarian aid is delivered shaken up in a big way, where we have an opportunity is to move more of the funding to local organizations. And localization, in a way, is long-term development, even if it's localization for humanitarian aid. So many of the contexts that you're working in, these are protracted humanitarian crises that go on for many years. And so if you can get more of the funding to local groups, build up their capabilities, over time, you're doing development too. So I think that's the big opportunity, and we've failed to do it. We had the grand bargain, now a decade ago. We talked about it, but the UN system has been very slow to shift. The number of crises has grown so quickly that there really wasn't time to reimagine the way we work. And so now you still have the traditional siloed approaches to this kind of work. I think we're going to be forced to see that go away because of the funding cuts. It's not the right way to do it. We will probably see people lose their lives because these agencies do important life-saving work every day. But I think you will see the UN agencies shrink so much, they'll have to reinvent themselves. They might have to merge, they might have to change their models. And if we can push them to get more of the humanitarian funding directly to local organizations, that's our opportunity for long-term development.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. This is Tebang Gerrits from Oxfam Novum. I wanted to get back quickly on the billionaires and their agenda for giving. Obviously, we've seen quite some billionaires that have had a positive impact, but I mean, you're just in the middle of a storm in which the biggest billionaire is playing a role. So, what is the risk of a number of billionaires using their funds to actually move an anti-rights agenda across the world? And yeah, can you say something about that, or have you seen any examples of that lately, or signs of billionaires going that way? Thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk. I think in particular, I talked about globalization has made the world more unequal in a lot of ways. I think AI is going to accelerate that. And I mean, it's already happening, right? So it becomes much easier for a government to be more authoritarian given the rise of these kinds of relatively cheap technologies. And so I think you can see billionaires in their own countries, so in the global south, let's say, align with governments using these new tools, and you could drive more and more an anti-rights agenda, more and more an authoritarian agenda that's very hard to fight. I think there's a lot of risk there. When it comes to the global north billionaires, there's risk particularly around cultural issues. And we see that in Africa around abortion, around LGBT rights. I think you will see more of that because billionaires are not necessarily progressive in their social and cultural views. They span the whole spectrum. So I think on cultural issues, you'll see that. I think it's less likely that you'll see global north billionaires directly partner with authoritarian leaders to support their power. It might happen. It's a risk. But there's also such a big opportunity that I don't want to lose sight of the opportunity side of the equation. Because when you think about health and education in particular, there is likely to be very little long-term funding for these things without these billionaires. And as one example, I recently interviewed, and next week I'm interviewing again, Howie Buffett, who's Warren Buffett's son. And he and his two siblings are going to direct the spending of Warren Buffett's fortune. I don't know how many people are familiar with this issue. I don't know whether they're on your radar, but they have $150 billion to give away. They have originally Warren asked for a 10-year timeline. That's probably expanded now, but either way, they will likely be the scale of the Gates Foundation. And they have their own issues they care about, but Howie focuses globally on agriculture and on conflict zones. He goes directly to the places. He's been in Ukraine 20 times on the front lines and directly gives money to local groups. These guys will become a very important philanthropy, as important as the Gates Foundation at some point, in the coming years. Michael Bloomberg, as I said, is already at 3 billion. He's probably going to get to, he's in his early 80s. I expect he will also be at the scale of the Gates Foundation. So I think you'll see at least a few, and maybe a dozen, very important major philanthropists at the scale of government. And this community has the chance to kind of shape them, hopefully, toward evidence-based, rights-based approaches that actually make a positive impact, even as groups like Oxfam will have to fight against some other billionaires who will have an anti-rights agenda or be promoting authoritarian, so it's going to be a very mixed bag. It's not just good, but you could say the same thing about official development assistance, from governments. It hasn't all been good, right? So this is just the new reality we are going to have to face.
Thanks very much. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Yeah?
Okay. Thank you. My name is Bilika. I'm international books officer from Volunteer Activist. Actually, my question is building up on what you just said about the new reality that we are actually facing, with a lot of dangers from many other people might take the different direction, let's say. And my question is, what kind of new strategies that we can actually explore for collaboration to advocate for human rights and democracy? Because you mentioned the idea of investment model, and it's not really helpful when you are talking about human rights. I hope.
To unpack it.
Yeah. I can tell you here in Washington, many of the rights-based groups are talking to their colleagues who have done this kind of work in Russia, in China, in places like that, to try to learn from them. I mean, that's how extreme it can feel for a lot of groups here. And it feels very much like we are losing if you believe in the rule of law and rights. It does not feel like we are in a position to advance. We're very much in a retreat. And that's just the reality, I think. I don't think there's any easy answer to how to go forward, but some of the kinds of lessons we're learning from colleagues in other countries is the importance of working together in coalition, not letting one group be singled out and attacked without all the groups coming and defending them. The importance of not giving in advance, being worried about what the administration might do or say, and therefore just giving in right away, but actually putting up resistance is important. Finding new and unlikely allies, maybe in the business world or in the national security sector or in the religious community. I think some of these lessons that have been picked up from other countries are probably going to apply even in the global north countries as our politics shifts. We will likely be in a state of defense, not an offense, but I think we still have to engage it, and it will be very tough, and it's hard to predict. Here in Washington, it could really go in many different ways. It's very hard to know where our politics is going, and we'll probably learn a lot more as we get closer to our midterm elections and we see how those play out. But right now, it does not feel like we are moving toward a more open, democratic system. It feels very worrying. But that's the reality we're all going to have to contend with. So while that may be the case, the needs in the global South continue. And if you imagine you're someone who is reliant on that daily HIV medication, we have to find a way to preserve as much as we can of these programs and fight for them, even in this larger context. It's a very challenging moment. I don't want to make it sound easy. It's the most challenging moment I've ever witnessed in my career. It's the busiest I've ever been in my life. I'm guessing it's for all of you, it may be the same. So that's just what we're living through, but we're going to have to fight on all of these fronts at the same time.
Thank you very much, Raj. It's been great to have you with us and to listen to your predictions, even though they came through they became true in the first 4 months of the year, almost all of them. So you have to probably write some new predictions. And also some recommendations on how, as a global community, because I think that's what you're also stressing, we are a global community, we're in the business of changing the world, and the title of your book behind you As a global community, we have to stick together. And I think that's a very important message that you gave us today. So thanks very much. People will probably be looking at the devex.com platform after this meeting, or maybe they've already done so, but I can definitely recommend it. It's full of interesting information and up-to-date articles. Good luck, and hope to see you again, and then in person. Thank you very much from all of us.
Thank you, Liana. Thank you, and congrats to the important work you're doing. I hope you have a great session together. See you.